using that. Let's say this is a range table which I'll be using. Range table is something which is internal to CC. We'll discuss this when we come to the CC topic. But let's say a range table is something. What happens is based on certain ranges, you have certain rates. Okay. So let's say for your premium customer, you have these are your ranges, or this is a range of usage. Let's say if your range is 0 to 150, the rate charged is, let's say, $2 per GB. Let's
Yeah.
say if your usage is 151 to, let's say, anything 500, then it's $1 per GB. And similarly, let's say from 501 to say 99999, it is $0.5 per GB. Similarly, we'll have a similar table for a regular customer also. So let's say since this is for premium, there'll be a different table for a regular customer. So then this, let's say this type of customer will always flow from the provider contract details. As in your provider contract, you'll have a characteristic, or in your product, you'll have a characteristic which you can basically configure, and you can see that in your when you feed the particular contract at the point of creation of that code, you can mention that this particular user is he a regular user or a premium user. So let's say for a regular user you have $3, this is $2, and this is $1. Similarly, so based on what usage you get, let's say you get a usage for 100, let's say if it's 50. Okay, if you're this is let's say this is my usage comes in records, as in one record per usage. Okay, and this is called a consumption item. In Prim, it's called a consumption item, or there is also another word for that called UDR, or a consumption data record, or CDR, or UDR, you can call it.
Yeah.
But in Prim, we usually call it as a consumption data record or a consumption item. This is like for every usage, you'll find that you'll have a consumption item associated with it. Let's say, so this is how it looks. So let's say you have in your consumption item, you'll always have these fields. You have user ID. This is a technical ID. So these three fields will always be there for every consumption record, and a
Yeah.
consumption date. Okay, these three fields will always be there, irrespective of whether it's whatever customer you have. These three fields will always be there because these three fields are needed for CC to rate that data usage. In addition to this, you can have multiple custom fields. Like if you have, let's say, scale, you have plan type, anything. These are all custom fields, but these three fields will always be needed. So these are always necessary. So in
Okay.
your user ID, this is in the user ID. If you see here, this will be your ID over here. This ID, technical ID, is basically something which is internal to CC. So don't get confused between technical resource and technical ID. Technical ID is something which is internal to CC. So let's say inside CC we have a charge plan which has a technical ID of, let's say, we are giving it as cloud usage. Okay, this is technical ID of cloud usage, and a consumption date. Let's say I'm giving it as today's days, which is 22/04/2023. Your usage quantity over here, you'll always have a usage quantity over here. So you'll need to have the quantity also which comes in, right?
Yeah.
Because without, you'll need to define what usage you're getting. So let's say if your usage quantity you're getting is, let's say 15, and user ID is basically this over here. So let's say you have access ID 1 and access ID 2. So let's say you have FA1987654009. So if you see here, so this user ID tells us that it is this contract. Okay, it is this solution quotation item. Technical ID tells you that it is this particular charge plan. So let's say you might also have another cloud premium or cloud, let's say CPU usage, something of that. So you might have a separate charge plan. Okay, but your user
Yeah.
ID, let's say if you have the same user ID, in this case, your charges might be different, right? So it is a combination of your user ID and technical ID, which will tell you that it is this particular provider contract or this particular solution quotation item, which needs to be rated, or which this consumption item record pertains to. So you can trace back
Okay.
that, and your plan type is basically, let's say, premium or customer, premium or regular, and this usage quantity. Okay, so this comes in as rateable status initially.
Yeah.
Rateable status. Okay, so the status is rateable. So there can be different statuses like rateable, raw, unrated, or anything. Rateable
Mhm.
means that it will be rated by a CC. Now in CC, let's say if your usage quantity is 15, it tells you this is a consumption item. When your usage quantity is 15, it tells you that your rate should be $2 per GB, right? Now the bit or the billable item which gets generated when you rate this particular record is, you'll have, let's say you have your usage is 15, your rate is 2, and since it's premium, it will pertain to this particular rate. Rate is 2. Your bit, your billable amount, which gets generated as part of this particular consumption item, you'll see that it is basically 15 into 2. So this is a simple scenario, but there can be multiple scenarios, and your currency will again be whatever it is, USD. So this is how the bit gets generated. So what happens is, in this you'll always have a source transaction ID, okay, over here
Uh-huh.
as part of every bit. Okay, so source
Yeah.
transaction ID, you will have a, let's say it's a number 11234. Okay, and the same source transaction ID, it will be there in the consumption item as well. So this basically tells you that if you want to backtrack, you can tell you that this particular billable item pertains to or is part of this particular consumption item. So this will always be there as in 12111234. You can backtrack it. In fact, in the bit in S4, let's say if you click the source transaction ID, right, it will take you to the consumption item, this particular consumption item in Brim.
Okay.
It takes you to that. So these are two different screens. This is a, let's say over here you have a, this is specific to consumption item, and this is specific to billable item. Now it is this billable amount which gets invoiced. So let's say
Okay.
you might have multiple, let's say over the course of 1 month, you might have multiple usages. Okay, and then your billable item gets generated, let's say for as part of, let's say you have something on 22nd, you have something on 24th, 25th. Let's say you might have multiple usages, right? And it all comes in the form of one sit. So let's say you don't want the customer to receive one invoice per bit, right? So what you can do is you can put an aggregation logic, and you can sum up the all the billable amounts pertaining to one particular date of consumption or the month of consumption. So let's say whatever is there in the month of April, if you want to sum it up, inside convergent invoicing, what you can do is you can put a rule that says that bill everything or aggregate everything which is there for the month of April. So whatever amounts are getting generated for the month of April, you can aggregate it, sum it up, and then only one single invoice gets generated to the customer. So that is something which can be done.
Oh, single invoice, but will it have all the details behind it, or just a
Yeah.
single line?
So that depends on your invoice form logic. So you might have, there are different forms, right? So you might
Yeah.
want that the customer would want to have a record of all these transactions. So
Yeah.
in that case, you can also put all these consumption item details over here. That this particular consumption item was there, and a part
Yeah.
of that consumption item, you can also put this particular billable amount as part of every consumption item, or the
Okay.
final amount as a part of that. So that can be done.
Okay.
So
And what
as
is
part of your, go ahead, sorry.
CDR, UDR is like your consumption item. It's like consumption date range or something, or usage
So
date range.
it's a consumption data record basically, or a usage rate data
Oh,
record.
consumption data record. Okay, got it. And
It's the
these
same
records are
as,
generated either automatically based on some machine reading, or it can be done manually also.
so it has to be sent via convergent mediation or any other network event. Let's say if you're using, let's say in a telecom scenario, let's say
Yeah.
if you have any telecom scenario, you might have certain network operators which are taking in all these usages, right? So telecom companies might have different network operators. So let's say
Yeah.
if it's Airtel, you might have multiple network operators, one for SMS charges, one for internet, one for calls. You might have different
Yeah.
data network operators, right, which are basically seeing what usage you are doing. So these
Yeah.
network operators will have
Yeah.
to send these particular usage data records
Yeah.
via convergent mediation to S4, either CC or CI, either CC or CI. So
Okay.
what can happen is there are two ways in which usage data can be sent. So you can straight away send it to CC using a web service API, which integrates between SOM and CC. So this particular scenario, which I showed you, this is specific to C convergent invoicing. So you send the convergent invoicing. In convergent invoicing, you rate it. So since this is rateable status, you rate it. Once you rate it, this flows to CC, and then CC will generate this usage. But what you can do is you can straight away send it from convergent mediation to convergent charging without sending it to CI. That is also possible. You have two options. If you straight away send it to CC, in CI you will only see this particular billable item. You
Uh-huh.
won't see you won't see a consumption data record over here. Okay, that is
Yeah.
there. but you can also you have one particular parameter which needs to be set as either true or false. If that
Mhm.
parameter is set to false, which is I think chargeable item returned information, if it's set to false, you won't see this particular data. But if it's set to true, you'll see that this particular bit gets generated, and this particular consumption item will also get generated. But this will never be in rateable status. It will always be in rated status. What it means is, since CC has already rated it, and then we are just sending a record to CI, it means that this is already rated. You don't need to rate it anymore. But if we send it the other way around, if you send it to CI first, in that case, it will be rateable status. Rateable means that you can rate it. But if you send it via CI, it will be rated. Means that you have already
So
generated a billable amount for this.
one question. So when we say
Mhm.
rating, all we are doing really is taking the consumption record and applying a dollar value to it. Is that?
Correct. Yeah, you're basically checking whatever details, whatever you might. This is a very simple scenario. You might have multiple cases, complex cases. In that case, what you can do is